Humanity has been bestowed with great gifts. Perhaps greatest of all is our imagination. Because ultimately, it's our imaginations that enable us to shape the world around us. The most obvious examples of that are the great buildings and architecture all around us. But which works of architecture should we see during our lifetimes? Find out in Top 10, The Art of Architecture. Guggenheim Museum, Bilbao, Spain. On the left bank of the river Nervión in Bilbao, the largest city of Spanish Basque Country, stands the distinctive Guggenheim Museum, Bilbao. Designed by the world-famous Canadian-born architect Frank O'Geary, it is a groundbreaking exemplar of 20th century architecture. Housing modern and contemporary art, the Guggenheim Museum Bilbao is one of the 3 museums operated by the Solomon R. Guggenheim Foundation, founded back in 1937. In the late 1980s, Basque authorities put a lot of energy into revitalizing Bilbao. And in 1991, they approached the Guggenheim Foundation about the building of a museum in Bilbao's former port area, displaying treasures from the Guggenheim collection.
And if you compare that with some other modern museums that have been built since then, the balance can kind of tilt over a bit, that the architecture takes over the space and the art becomes secondary in the thing. And then it becomes difficult.
The foundation chose a boldly idiosyncratic design by Geary, who in 1989 had been awarded the Pritzker Architecture Prize, the Nobel Prize of Architecture. Geary designed a curved, irregularly shaped titanium glass and limestone structure supported by steel. The building is coated with around 33,000 titanium sheets that reflect light and change color according to weather and light conditions.
This building has actually become a representative for a whole way of thinking.
Construction on the 32,000 plus square meter site started in 1993, and the museum was opened 4 years later by the then King of Spain, Juan Carlos I. The heart of the museum, and one of its signature features, is the atrium, around which are the 3 floors which house the galleries. 50 meters high and with large glass curtain walls, the atrium is flooded with light and capped by a huge metal skylight in the shape of a flower. The museum's 20 galleries are connected by a network of curved catwalks, staircases, and glass elevators. They provide different perspectives on the exhibition spaces, which take up approximately 11,000 square meters. Some of the galleries are built along classical lines, while others are more irregular or organic in their proportions.
You don't know anything about the inside of it, but you have the feeling when you see all these forms that maybe how is the proportions? Nobody tells you about that, or what is inside actually.
The largest gallery is 30 meters wide, 130 meters long, and completely free of columns. It houses Richard Serra's monumental installation, The Matter of Time, which consists of his 100-metre-long steel sculpture, Snake, and 7 newer sculptures positioned around it. Outside the gallery, a motorway bridge was cleverly incorporated into the museum's exterior design. The Guggenheim Museum Bilbao, half sculpture, half building, is one of the world's most spectacular buildings in the deconstructivist style. The most important building of Gehry's architectural career. It is an instantly recognizable icon of the city of Bilbao. The Rijksmuseum, Amsterdam, the Netherlands. The first Rijksmuseum originally opened to the public in 1800 as the National Art Gallery in The Hague. In 1815, the entire collection was shifted to the new capital of Amsterdam, and the museum was given its present name, the Rijks, or Imperial Museum.
And by analyzing existing architecture and also you can learn a lot about it.
The present building on Museum Square was first opened in 1885, after 9 years of construction. It was designed by the Dutch architect Pierre Cuypers, also responsible for Amsterdam Central Station and numerous churches in the Netherlands. His neo-Gothic red brick design for the Rijksmuseum mixed Gothic and Renaissance styles and employed materials and decorations lifted straight from Dutch art. Looking not unlike a fairy tale castle from the outside, the interior was divided by a thoroughfare creating 2 inner courtyards. The facade was richly decorated with reliefs, sculptures, tiles, and stained glass windows. While the interior was adorned with murals, mosaics, and rectangular columns. Numerous alterations were made during the 20th century in order to do away with any interior decorations which competed for attention with the masterpieces on display. Colored walls were whitewashed, and additional exhibition rooms were added to the 2 courtyards. From 2004 to 2013, the museum went through a major refurbishment, directed by the Spanish architects Antonio Cruz and Antonio Ortiz. They combined the museum's original layout with modern facilities, climate control, and security features. Probably most impressive was the transformation of the courtyards into a double atrium, linked by a passageway below. This created a new entrance hall to the museum. Glass vaults in the atrium meant sunlight was restored to the courtyards. The auditorium and museum shop below the limestone floors are now at 9.25 meters below sea level.
You can actually strip down a lot of old buildings to their organization and their structure and the ideas. And there's some very, very nice ideas in a lot of these old buildings.
In some of the museum's main halls, including the Night Watch Gallery, designed to showcase Rembrandt's world-famous painting of the same name, a team of restoration experts went to work. The gallery's interiors had originally been designed by the French designer Jean-Michel Wilmot, most famous for his interiors in the Musée du Louvre. The museum presents the world's largest collection of Dutch paintings from the 15th to the 19th century, but is most celebrated for its paintings from the 17th century, golden age of Dutch art, including the work of artists such as Rembrandt and Frans Hals. Today's Rijksmuseum is case study of how creative solutions responded to the challenge of renovating a building already considered a national treasure. Eventually, it was not so much renovated as reinvented. Museum aan de Stroom, Antwerp, Belgium. This museum is the youngest of all the buildings in our top 10, and the only one where the permanent exhibition is not devoted to fine art and art history. Instead, this museum's focus is on ethnography and the history of the Belgian city of Antwerp, and by extension, the world to which Antwerp has been connected for centuries, via its thriving seaport. The museum on the river, or the Maas for short, is located on the right bank of the River Scheldt, between the two oldest docks in Antwerp, on the site of the former Hanseatic House, an important trade and shipping office and warehouse well until it burned down in 1893. In 2000, the Dutch architectural firm Nutelings Reidetschik won the tender to design the new museum building. Actual construction took 4 years, from 2006 to 2010. The museum opened with the exhibition Masterpieces in the Maas, 5 Centuries of Images in Antwerp, contrasting the city depicted by the 16th and 17th century masters with that of contemporary artists.
It's the same as in the Centre Pompidou. You see the people on the outside moving across the facade, and you can understand the building when you look at it from the outside. And I think that's important, to give people a chance to actually understand the building.
The 10-story rusty red warehouse is in some ways an homage to the 19th century warehouses typical of the harbour district. It also resembles a pile of gigantic boxes piled one on top of the other. The 60-metre-high tower is supported by a central concrete core encasing elevators and fire escapes. Steel frames, which can be seen inside the exhibition halls, are suspended from the core. The outer walls of prefabricated concrete panels are attached to the ends of these frames. Thus, the whole exterior becomes an adjustable space.
One level with that, then they turn it a bit, then it's glass, then they turn it a bit and it's bricks. It's a playful thing with a high house.
A facade of corrugated glass can be rotated a quarter turn at each level of the building. These corrugated curtains of glass are 5.5 meters high. The interior space with an escalator inside forms a kind of large spiral staircase, affording constantly changing views of the city. The building is covered by large panels of hand-cut Indian red sandstone, with a computer-generated 4-colored mosaic pattern. A recurring motif are metal ornaments in the shape of hands, symbol of the city of Antwerp, which adorns the exterior. The same pattern is repeated inside. The square at the foot of the tower is made from the same natural red stone and is an ideal space for events and open-air exhibits. Construction of the Maas was part of the redevelopment of the harbour district, which is coming back to life as old warehouses are converted into lofts and several other large public buildings have opened. The Maas, the largest museum in Antwerp and a unique public space, has become an icon of this dynamic urban renewal. The Uffizi Gallery, Florence, Italy. The museum with the finest collection of Italian Renaissance paintings is, unsurprisingly, located in Florence, Italy. The city's historic centre was listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1982. The Uffizi Gallery is close to the Ponte Vecchio, the famous bridge across the river Arno, and the Palazzo Vecchio, Florence's town hall, in front of which proudly stands a replica of Michelangelo's David. The gallery is housed in the Palazzo degli Uffizi, which was commissioned by the Duke of Florence Cosimo I de' Medici in 1559 to hold all of the various Florentine offices, or Uffizi in Italian. It was designed by the famous painter and architect Giorgio Vasari. It was, however, Cosimo Medici's son and successor, Francesco I, who insisted the top floor of the Uffizi become a repository for the Medici art collection. The gallery was created in 1581 on completion of its east wing. This gallery was only accessible to certain VIP visitors, but in 1769, the future Holy Roman Emperor, Leopold of the House of Lorraine, inherited all of the Medici property when the dynasty finally came to an end. It was Leopold who first opened the gallery to the public. A classic example of architecture from the late Renaissance Mannerist period, the palace forms a U shape with a long and narrow open courtyard lined by a double loggia of columns, which connects with the river Arno and the Piazza della Signorina. A portico opens up from the courtyard to the river and forms a picture that is most pleasing to the eye. The symmetrical outline of the building's exterior is not, however, repeated within. An irregular ground plan is divided into halls and corridors of various shapes and sizes. The ground floor also incorporates remnants of a Romanesque church, one of the many buildings demolished before work first began on the construction of the palace. But the heart of the gallery is the domed octagonal hall on the second floor. Known as the Tribuna, it displays the most important masterpieces from the Medici collection.
In the old days, when they exhibited paintings in these rooms, you had the walls covered with paintings. You actually didn't have this thing like you have in modern art, where you have a big white wall and you have this single painting, but you have 20 paintings on the walls.
Over the centuries, the gallery has continued to expand from the top floor to the lower levels. The museum's exhibition space has also doubled in size over the past few decades due to constant renovations. The palace was arguably Giorgio Vasari's finest architectural achievement and a true masterpiece. The first building in Florence that was fully conceived as a model of urban design. The beautiful views of the Uffizi from across the Arno are testimony to Vasari's visionary genius. Hermitage Museum, St. Petersburg, Russia. Founded in 1703 and once the shining new capital of the great Russian Empire, today St. Petersburg is Russia's second largest city, situated just 100 kilometers from the border with Finland. The city is home to the Hermitage Museum, which contains a vast collection of some 3 million works of art, including some of the most important European artists.
4 buildings for different purposes in the beginning, and they are mirroring in the water.
The museum is housed across 7 buildings from the 18th and 19th centuries. 5 of the buildings make up a formidable interconnected palace complex on the banks of the river Neva. This includes the Winter Palace, former imperial residence of Russian monarchs. Since its conception in 1753, the already colossal Baroque Winter Palace, with more than 460 luxuriously decorated rooms, was continually expanded by the Tsars. In 1764, Empress Catherine the Great soon ordered that a new wing, effectively another palace, be added to it. Intended as a place of retreat from the formalities of the court, she named it the Hermitage and furnished it with at least 225 paintings by Flemish and Dutch masters.
Even though these buildings are quite monumental, there is still some peace in it, I think, in this very organized way of doing a building.
The Hermitage, now known as the Small Hermitage, was built in 2 stages. First, the Russian court architect Yuri Veltin combined the Baroque style with the new fashion for neoclassicism to create the Southern Pavilion. In the second stage, French architect Jean-Baptiste Vaillant de la Motte built the Northern Pavilion, adopting the more austere neoclassical style. The 2 pavilions were then connected by hanging gardens and galleries to complete the Small Hermitage in 1775.
In museums of modern art, you need a completely different flexibility from what you needed in old museums, where you would traditionally have rooms where you place sculptures, and you have rooms where you hang painting from the walls.
Catherine the Great bought up masterpieces in large quantities to create a collection comparable to those of other European monarchs. Not finished yet, she ordered the construction of a larger building next to it on the embankment. This neoclassical building was named the Great Hermitage and was intended to house all the palace collections plus the library. Catherine's grandson, Nicholas I, commissioned the new Hermitage, Russia's first purpose-built art museum. It opened to the public in 1852. The remaining 2 buildings of the Hermitage complex are the Hermitage Theatre and the Winter Palace. This was declared a museum in 1917 after the October Revolution overthrew the Romanov dynasty. In the Hermitage Museum, European design still features strong hints of traditional Russian architecture, while the splendid exhibition halls are a monument to the bygone imperial dynasty. No wonder it has been dubbed the Russian Louvre. British Museum, London, UK. Although the building is not as grand as the Hermitage, the collections at the British Museum in London are more than twice the size of its Russian counterpart. Indeed, the British Museum is home to one of the largest permanent exhibitions in the museum world. The British Museum was first established in the 18th century, when the physician, naturalist and collector Sir Hans Sloane bequeathed his private collection to king and country.
In historical times, it was often a show of wealth and what you have. And in modern times, one has started, I think since the 80s, 70s, 80s, started using museum as an impulse.
The British Museum was originally housed in a 17th century mansion, which stood on the present site in the Bloomsbury area of central London. However, after the King's Library, a collection of books created by George III, was donated to the nation, a new building was needed. The new quadrangle building surrounding a large central courtyard with 4 wings and a grand south front was designed by leading English architect Sir Robert Smirke in 1823. Smirke designed the building in the then popular Greek Revival style. This style is apparent on the south entrance, with its stairs, rows of columns, and crowning pediment. However, Smirke was no mere slave to tradition, but a genuine innovator. He used the cutting-edge technology of his day. The frame of the building was made from cast iron and embedded in concrete foundations. The walls were made of brick, and the facades were encased with limestone.
The most important for a building is, of course, that it functions for the use of it.
The first completed wing was, of course, dedicated to the King's Library. The grand double-height room is characteristic of the so-called Age of Enlightenment. Its size was made possible by the pioneering use of cast-iron beams to support the ceiling. The building was officially completed in 1852, and yet construction works continued as more space was needed to contain the ever-expanding collections. And so, over time, other buildings in the block surrounding Smirke's quadrangle became integrated into the museum. As early as 1857, a separate reading room was built in the middle of the courtyard, a masterpiece of mid-19th century technology. The 42-square-meter domed room was constructed using cast iron, concrete, glass, and with the latest heating and ventilation systems. At the turn of the 21st century, the whole inner courtyard was enclosed by a glass roof with the reading rooms at its center, making it the largest covered public square in Europe. But arguably, the most spectacular aspect of the British Museum are its collections, which come from all over the world. They include antiquities from the great ancient civilizations. Most controversially, there are the Elgin marbles, classical Greek sculptures taken from Athens at the start of the 19th century. With its huge variety of exhibits, the British Museum sheds light on virtually every epoch in the history of mankind. National Museum of Modern Art, Paris, France. The second largest collection of modern and contemporary art in the world, after the Museum of Modern Art in New York, is to be found at the National Museum of Modern Art in Paris. The building that accommodates this collection is as famed as any of the artworks within. Indeed, Centre Pompidou is possibly the most radical example anywhere of structural expressionism, the so-called high-tech architecture of the 1970s. A style known for displaying the structural components of buildings on the outside as well as the inside.
What is fascinating with that building is that what they have done there is that they've actually managed to create these very, very large, through a very complex construction, very large spans, big spaces where you can really exhibit anything.
In 1969, President Georges Pompidou commissioned the construction of a cultural center that would place the National Museum of Modern Art, an important public library, and other cultural projects all together under the same roof. The competition to design the new building attracted 681 competitors from 49 countries, and in 1971, the jury announced the winning design. it was the work of a team of 3 architects, Renzo Piano and Gianfranco Francini and the Englishman Richard Rogers. All 3 were relatively young and unknown at the time, but Piano and Rogers were both later awarded the Pritzker Prize, the Oscar or Nobel Prize of Architecture. In simple terms, the Centre Pompidou is a building turned inside out. On the exterior, all the services, lifts and escalators, wiring and piping rest on a metal frame, leaving the vast interior space uninterrupted by load-bearing structures and thus capable of multi-purpose adaptation. Facilities for moving people around, such as lifts and escalators, are concentrated on the western side of the structure, towards the plaza below. But all of the technical equipment and pipelines are on the opposite side, muffling the sound of the traffic from the street, with some 15,000 tons of steel and 11,000 square meters of glass. A truly pioneering building was the result, a worthy heir to the great iron buildings of the industrial age.
Pompidou really celebrates the art and the movement of the people. It's a very people-based building, a very democratic building.
Four boldly distinctive colors brighten the facade of the Centre Pompidou, following a code laid down by the architects. Blue for air conditioning, yellow for circulating electricity, green for the circulation of water, and red for the movement of people, such as escalators and elevators. Named after President Pompidou, who died in 1974, the centre was completed in 1977. It has since become one of the most visited monuments in France, both for its influential exhibitions of contemporary art and as a triumph of architectural engineering. Futuristic in so many vital aspects, its revolutionary character has made the Centre Pompidou an emblem of 20th century architecture. Tate Modern Gallery, London, UK. As fine example as there is of the adaptation and repurposing of an existing building, the former Bankside Power Station in London houses the modern and contemporary art of Tate Modern, jewel in the crown of the Tate family of galleries. Tate Modern was originally founded by Henry Tate, owner of a number of sugar refineries. He donated his collection of paintings to the nation, contributing large sums to the redevelopment of the gallery building.
The point at which the art entered the museum, that's when the building was fulfilled. Before that, it was uninteresting, actually.
A coal-fired power station had existed at Bankside since 1891, but was replaced by a new, more environmentally friendly oil-fired station on the same site in 1947. The Bankside Power Station, later reused by Tate Modern, was designed by Sir Giles Gilbert Scott and is an imposing steel-framed and brick-clad building typical of the era. It consisted of a huge turbine hall which housed the electricity generators and a boiler house parallel to that.
But with the Tate Modern, you have, in a way, a very monumental, very great existing building. And I think what they've managed to do is to keep quite a low profile and to leave these big and use these big spaces, the big entrance space.
There were 2 chimneys, one at each end of the building in the original plan, but only one central 99-metre tall chimney was actually built. Any structure that might have dwarfed St. Paul's Cathedral across the Thames was considered in bad taste. The new power station was constructed in 2 stages. The western half and the chimney between 1947 and 1953, and the eastern part between 1959 and 1963. But in October 1981, the power station closed because of increasing oil prices and pollution. At first, there were plans to demolish it. This, despite the fact the building was already considered an architectural achievement worthy of preservation. Fortunately, in 1994, it was selected as the site for the new Tate Gallery. Swiss architects Herzog and de Meuron, who were later awarded the Pritzker Architecture Prize, were commissioned with its redesign. Their outlines retained much of the original character of the power station. The turbine hall became an impressive entrance hall and display space for large sculptures and installations. The boiler house was given a 2-story glass extension to become gallery space. Seven gallery floors were created using a steel framework built within the existing walls of the power station. This framework also supports the brick facade. The building was sealed watertight, and environmental controls, permanent lighting fixtures, stairs, lifts, and escalators were all installed.
The interesting thing is that the building comes from a time when industry was celebrated. So if you would do the same thing now and take an industrial building that was built in the 80s or 90s and convert that to a museum, it would be much more difficult.
Since it opened in 2000, Tate Modern has attracted millions of visitors each year who also come to admire Shakespeare's Globe, just next door, and the Millennium Bridge. Tate Modern is now a success story of urban regeneration and the reuse of an otherwise obsolete building. But the story of Bankside Power Station is not over yet. After converting the power station's 3 huge underground oil tanks into a performance and exhibition venue, Tate Modern is now in the process of completing a new 11-story building. This is situated above the boilers and will allow for even more exhibition space. Louvre, Paris, France. One of the largest and most famous art museums in the world came about as the direct result of a bloody revolution, the French Revolution to be precise. The Louvre Palace had previously been the Parisian residence of French royalty before it was transformed into a museum and opened to the public in August 1793, just before the onset of the so-called Reign of Terror.
And on the one hand, the old Louvre is very traditional. It has these rooms and these corridors and a lot of paintings, and you used to have to go in on one side, and then you would kind of walk through hundreds of 18th, 19th century French paintings, which one can like or not like, before then all the tourists arrived at the Mona Lisa.
The Louvre stands on the right bank of the River Seine and comprises a complex of wings and pavilions which surrounds 2 large courtyards, the Renaissance Cour Carrée, the square courtyard, and the larger 19th century Cour Napoléon, the Napoleon courtyard. The Louvre was built on the site of a former fortress that was demolished in the 16th century by King Francis I in order to make way for a new royal residence. It was Francis who initiated the vast art collections to be handed down to generations of French royalty. His acquisitions included what is now the most famous painting in the world, Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa.
They renew it with this glass pyramid in a sort of postmodernistic style, you know? And it looks very beautiful inside there.
The architect of the new palace was Pierre Lescot, and indeed the oldest part of today's Louvre bears his name. The architect of the Lescot wing was influenced by Mannerism, not unlike the Uffizi Gallery in 16th century Italy. Over time, the royal residence gradually developed in the styles of French Baroque and Classicism. The Palais de Tuileries was linked to the Louvre Palace, and the architect Claude Perrault completed the Cour Carrée with a masterfully constructed row of columns. In the 19th century, already a working museum, the Louvre underwent the largest extension in its history. Two major wings extending west were added, creating the Napoleon courtyard. By 1871, the Louvre had arrived at something like its present shape.
And then came Pei, and he said, wait a minute, you know, we put an entrance in the middle, and then we start spreading from there.
At the end of the 20th century, the museum was modernized and extended yet again. Amenities were constructed beneath the Napoleon courtyard, with the main entrance to the museum now situated in its center. Most controversially, in 1989, the entrance was graced with a glass and steel pyramid designed by Chinese-American architect I.M. Pei. He also oversaw renovations to the wing, which once housed France's Ministry of Finance. This means that the whole of the Louvre Palace complex is now an art museum. The present-day Louvre displays more than 35,000 works of art, and its collection of French paintings from the 15th to the 19th century is unparalleled. But the site is also exceedingly rich in architectural styles and artifacts from many major eras in world history. "30 years ago, the pyramidal entrance was intended to receive 4.5 million visitors a year, but now welcomes more than twice that number. This makes the Louvre the second most visited museum in the world, after the Palace Museum in Beijing, our final destination for this show. Palace Museum, Beijing, China. The Palace Museum in Beijing is indeed the most visited museum in the world. Like the Louvre in Paris and the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, it is housed in a palace, though one rather different in design. The Palace Museum is located in the Forbidden City, the residence of Chinese emperors for almost 5 centuries in the center of Beijing.
It is this philosophical way of thinking, and I think the whole Forbidden Town is based on this philosophy.
After Zhu Di of the Ming Dynasty became Emperor of China, he ordered an imperial palace to be built in Beijing. The palace was thus constructed between 1406 and 1420. Centuries later, in 1925, it was declared a palace museum. This after the last emperor had been overthrown and the People's Republic established in China. At that time, more than 1 million items were listed in the museum collection. That number has risen to more than 1.8 million. A UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1987, the Forbidden City is a 72-hectare rectangular walled complex, measuring 961 metres north to south and 753 metres east to west, situated along a central north-south axis. This follows the traditional Chinese system of feng shui. There are hundreds of halls and palaces made of wood, red brick and white marble with painted ridges and carved beams topped by yellow roofs, spread out on both sides of the central imperial way. However, because these buildings were usually supported by wooden frames, they were susceptible to fires. Extensive reconstruction works were therefore common over the years. Yet all the work done over the centuries has respected the original design.
And the roofs are in tiles, and in the Forbidden City, they are yellow. All the roofs are almost yellow.
At its heart are two large courtyards, the outer court, site of the emperor's court and his grand audiences, and the residential inner court. Each wall of the city has a gate, but the main entrance has always been from the south through the Meridian Gate. This is one of the tallest buildings in the entire complex. Beyond the gate lies a courtyard containing the inner Golden Water River, traversed by 5 white marble bridges. The river leads to the Gate of Supreme Harmony, which in turn opens onto the outer court. In the outer court stand 3 main halls. One of these, the Hall of Supreme Harmony, in the very center of the Forbidden City, is the largest and most imposing. Serving as the throne hall, it is lavishly decorated. Golden dragons adorn its exterior and interior, and the 10 figurines of each of its roof corners proclaim its imperial pedigree. With collections representing 5,000 years of Chinese civilization, the Palace Museum is a masterpiece of Chinese imperial palace architecture, illustrating the grandeur of the Ming and Qing dynasties.
A lot of the monuments definitely are conveying power.
Monuments and memorials are able to connect with the hearts of people through symbolism and grandeur. Seeing them is bound to make a lasting impression. Next Wednesday, Top 10, The Art of Architecture, at 9:35 on Pearl.